Hey buddy, why are you sitting alone in an empty restaurant?
Just having my coffee. Why?
I passed by a few times. You've been here a while. Looks like you're casing the place.
No, I'm just enjoying my drink.
I know the owner, and he doesn't trust people like you around her. Let me see your ID.
I don't have to give you ID without cause.
Then stand up. I'm not playing
That's
around.
funny.
You know, some stories start with a bang. This one, it starts with a simple cup of coffee, but it ends with a $650,000 lawsuit and a complete overhaul of police training. So let's get into it. Let's break down what happens when a totally normal morning spirals into a major confrontation over bias, belonging, and who gets to decide who's a criminal. Wow, just let that sink in for a second. That's Marcus Lawson, the owner of L's Diner. And that one sentence just cuts right to the absolute heart of this whole thing. You can feel the pain in it, right? This wasn't just about being questioned. For him, his entire life's work, everything he built, was just dismissed in an instant because of one person's assumption.
Okay, so picture this. It's about 10:20 in the morning at L's Diner, a really popular spot. The breakfast rush is done, it's quiet, and the owner, Marcus Lawson, is just sitting in a booth, scrolling on his phone, drinking a coffee. A totally normal moment in a totally normal day. Until a rookie police officer happens to look through the window. And this is where you see two completely different realities collide. I mean, look at this. From the officer's point of view, he sees a suspicious person, maybe someone who's casing the joint, getting ready to rob it. But the reality, it's just the owner, having coffee. The door wasn't forced open, it was unlocked, the lights are on, but all the officer sees is a potential crime in progress. So does the officer Holloway hang back and observe, try to gather a little more info? Nope. He walks right in and immediately confronts Marcus. He doesn't ask questions, he makes accusations. He accuses him of casing the restaurant and demands to know what he's doing there. It's an immediate escalation from 0 to 100, all based on that first incorrect assumption. So Marcus, probably a bit stunned, calmly says, "I'm the owner." And you'd think, okay, that's the end of it, right? Misunderstanding over. But no, this next part is all about what happens when someone refuses to check basic facts, turning a simple mix-up into a serious official incident. And it's not like figuring this out was some impossible puzzle. I mean, look at how easy this would have been to clear up. The business licenses are literally hanging on the wall. He could have done a quick search on his phone, he could have asked literally anyone walking by, or he could have just used some basic logic. The door was unlocked. All of these simple checks were right there, but he ignored every single one. So here's the turning point. Instead of taking, 30 seconds to glance at the wall, Officer Holloway decides to double down. He doesn't believe Marcus, he basically calls him a liar and gets on the radio to call for his supervisor. He chooses to escalate the situation rather than just admitting he might have made a mistake. He's locked in. And that's when Sergeant Patricia Owens arrives on the scene. And let me tell you, she's a 19-year veteran. She's seen it all. She takes one look at the situation, Marcus, the coffee, the open door, and she gets it instantly. She just calmly walks over to the wall, reads the licenses, and confirms Marcus is in fact the owner. And her words to her rookie officer say everything. This wasn't just a mistake, it was profiling. Now, this incident didn't happen in a vacuum. It didn't stay within the four walls of that diner. Oh no, when something like this happens at a beloved local spot, the ripples spread through the whole community, and they spread fast. This is the point Marcus made directly to Sergeant Owens. For him, this wasn't just some rookie mistake, some forgivable error from an inexperienced cop. He felt, deep down, that the only reason that officer saw a criminal instead of a business owner was because he's black. And that belief, that this was about racial bias, is what drove everything that happened next. And boy, did the word get out. Staff started telling customers got on social media, and posts just exploded. And here's the key. The diner's own security cameras caught the whole thing on tape. Undeniable proof. Pretty soon, local news reporters were calling, and other local business groups started putting out statements supporting Marcus. The community was mobilizing.
Okay, so the story is public, there's video evidence, and people are angry. The call for accountability was getting really loud, really fast. And this is where we see a personal injustice start to transform into a major legal and professional reckoning, not just for the officer, but for the entire police department. It took Marcus exactly 2 days to hire a lawyer. And the lawsuit they filed, as you can see here, was about way more than just one officer's bad judgment. Sure, it alleged racial profiling and unlawful detention, but the really big claims were negligent training and negligent supervision. They weren't just going after the officer, they were arguing that the entire system had failed Marcus.
19 months later, the city decided to settle, And this number, $650,000, that's the price tag the city and its taxpayers had to pay for Officer Holloway's single, flawed assumption that morning. It's about as tangible as accountability gets.
This timeline really shows you just how much momentum this had. Day 1, the incident happens. Day 2, he's already got a lawyer. And just 4 months later, Officer Holloway was fired from the police force. The lawsuit itself took a bit longer to resolve, but the outcome was never really in doubt, not with that video and that much public support.
And getting fired wasn't even the end of it for Holloway. His termination had a permanent consequence. His name was added to the National Decertification Index. So what does that mean? Well, it's essentially a national do not hire list for law enforcement. It means he can't just quit and go get a job as a cop in the next town over. His career in policing is effectively over.
So the officer is gone. The owner gets a settlement. You'd think the story ends there, right? Case closed. But for Marcus Lawson, this was never just about one officer or one check. He argued that the real problem was the system that put that officer on his doorstep in the first place. In this quote from Marcus really shows you where his head was at. His focus wasn't just on personal justice. He saw a much bigger, systemic failure. He didn't see Officer Holloway as just one bad apple, but as a product of a system that was rushing undertrained officers onto the streets without the judgment or supervision they clearly needed. And here it is. This is the core issue that the lawsuit really brought to light. It turns out Holloway's own field training officer had actually written down concerns about his judgment. So why on earth was he patrolling alone? The lawsuit argued it was because of a staffing crisis. The department needed bodies on the street, and that need was prioritized over making sure those bodies were actually ready.
As a direct result of this case, the department was forced to make some huge changes. Look at this list. Field training was literally doubled, from 12 weeks to 6 months. They made community engagement mandatory to help build trust with business owners. New bias training became required before an officer could go on solo patrol. And maybe most importantly, they created a system to actually do something when a training officer flags concerns about a rookie. These are real, concrete reforms.
But I think Marcus himself summed it all up perfectly when he spoke to the city council. The money is one thing, right? But the real cost, the human cost, is that feeling, that message that even when you've built something from the ground up, you can still be seen as an outsider, as someone who doesn't belong, in the very space you created. That's the wound that takes a lot longer to heal.
Which leaves us with a really critical question to think about. This police department doubled its training time to 6 months, which is a big step. But some people argue that's not nearly enough. So what if a full year of supervised field training became the national standard? No exceptions, no cutting corners for staffing shortages. Would that be enough to prevent the next Marcus Lawson from having his whole world questioned over a cup of coffee?
So picture this. It's a quiet Tuesday morning, and a police officer walks into a diner. Now, that might sound like the start of a bad joke, but what actually happened next, well, it was anything but funny. It was a collision of two completely different realities that ended a career, cost a city a ton of money, and really, it exposed a much deeper issue. Okay, so let's just dive right in. We're gonna drop you into the middle of this really tense conversation. It all started when Officer Trevor Holloway saw a man sitting all by himself in what he thought was an empty restaurant. And that's how the officer opens. That's his first line. He'd apparently driven by a few times, saw this man just sitting there, and, his rookie instincts, maybe clouded by some bias he hadn't really thought about, just immediately jumped to the absolute worst conclusion. And that's the response from the man in the booth, Marcus Lawson. Totally calm, totally measured. I mean, he's just trying to have a cup of coffee in a place he knows well, but you can already feel things starting to escalate. And there it is. That one phrase, people like you. That's the moment, right there, where a routine check-in just spirals into this deeply personal, prejudiced confrontation. And it's all based on nothing more than an assumption. Boom! With that one sentence, the officer's entire reason for being there just collapses. It's a shocking reveal that leaves us with this one massive question. How on earth did we get to this point? To really understand how this all went so wrong, we've got to start with the man who was just accused of casing his very own restaurant. So who exactly is Marcus Lawson? What's so interesting here is that this timeline charts this incredible journey of pure dedication and risk. Marcus didn't just stumble into owning this diner. He actually left a stable accounting job to build this place from the ground up, all to honor his father's dream. For 8 years, he poured everything into it, turning it into a beloved community spot. So let's be crystal clear, this is not a suspicious person. This is an educated, experienced business owner. He's an employer, a real pillar of the local economy. And on that Tuesday, he was just taking a very brief, very well-earned break in his own place after prepping for the breakfast rush. That's it. Okay, now let's flip the coin and look at the other side of this. We need to understand the officer's perspective. Who was the man who looked at a successful business owner and somehow saw a threat? This one number says so much. 9 months. Think about that. He's basically fresh out of the academy. Officer Holloway was a rookie, plain and simple, with almost no real-world experience. And he'd been assigned to patrol a neighborhood he didn't even know. And here's the thing, the red flags were already there. It says it right here in his performance evaluation from the academy. Sure, he had enthusiasm, but it also warned about his judgment, about his tendency to make assumptions based on how people look. These weren't criticisms that came up after the incident. These were warnings that were there from the very beginning. And this is really where an individual's own bias meets a system under pressure. His training officer flagged him twice, but the department was so short-staffed they just pushed him through anyway. He was brand new to this specific beat, and so he defaulted to a stereotype instead of just observation. So let's go back to the diner, because this is where these two vastly different realities, the established, hardworking owner and the inexperienced, biased officer, are about to have a confrontation that's going to have career-ending consequences. Can you believe that? Even after Marcus tells him he owns the place, Holloway just doubles down. It's like his brain can't reconcile the reality right in front of him with the assumption that's stuck in his head. So he challenges Marcus to prove who he is, in his own restaurant. And Marcus, so calmly, does exactly that. He doesn't just say it, he shows him. With a few simple gestures, he just points to the undeniable official proof of his life's work hanging all over the walls. And just like that, the officer's entire case just gets dismantled. And this is the question that cuts right to the heart of it all. Marcus just moves right past all the protocol and procedure and asks about the bias that kicked this whole thing off. It's a question that just hangs heavy in the air with no answer. So what happens when inexperience and bias lead to a formal complaint like this? Well, the consequences are swift, they are severe, and they are very, very expensive. Just look at that number. That's the price tag for that 10-minute interaction. Over $500,000 that the city had to pay out, all because an officer wasn't properly trained or supervised. And that's the professional cost. Officer Holloway's career in law enforcement was over. Done. His enthusiasm just couldn't make up for his flawed judgment. And this one incident pretty much defined his entire 9-month tenure on the force. And really, when you get down to it, this wasn't just about one rookie having a bad day. It was a systemic failure. A failure of a system that ignored clear warnings, that rushed training, and that put an officer out on the street who was just not prepared to tell the difference between a citizen and a suspect. And that's really the powerful question this whole story leaves us with, isn't it? The fallout is obvious, but the solution? Well, that's a lot more complex. It's not just about dishing out consequences after something goes wrong. It's about building a system of training and accountability that stops these kinds of collisions from ever happening in the first place.